as I said there, the story of the whole BI suite in SharePoint is such a huge one, covering 3 massive products of SQL Server, SharePoint and Office, that it's really quite hard to encapsulate the whole story in just 2 hours. Well, we did our best on 2010 in the first hour, and now we're going to try and do a similar magic trick with SharePoint 2013. So, just for those of you who weren't here this morning, then my name's Dave McMahon, and I'm the Software Systems Architect for Rigian. Rigian are a gold partner for BI and SharePoint, based in the Midlands. We're right outside the doorsteps of the National Indoor Arena, right in the middle of Birmingham.
I'm Dave Morrow. I'm head of the BI team at Rigian. So we do BI projects based on SQL Server and also using Office and SharePoint.
And I omitted to say that my role, really, I gave you my title, but not what I actually do, which is I'm in charge of architecting our SharePoint solutions. So here's our contact details again. If you missed them first time, please do feel free to email us with any questions. You can tweet me if you like, but I don't actually respond very much to Twitter these days. I'm more of a Facebook guy. Treat that as with contempt as you may. And that's my blog up there. And as again with this morning, I would like to indulge you and ask your forbearance to leave any questions that you might have until the end. We do have a lot to get through. If it's a real burning question and we're just confusing you, then by all means do raise your hand. But if it's just to seek out more information, then please make a note, and we'll have a good question and answer session at the end. And quite happy to chat with you down the corridors, over breaks or whatever, even later on through the next session if it's something you really want to discuss. Very, very pleased to do that. So this morning, say we covered the 2010 story, and this afternoon we're going to be pretty much doing kind of the same sort of stuff as we did this morning in the same order. So we're going to look at the business intelligence platform on SharePoint very briefly as an overview, followed by a look at a more detailed look with some more of my friend Dave Morrow's crazy demos for looking at Excel services and some other aspects of the new BI suite. We're also going to look very briefly again at securing the BI platform. We did as I call it, the Usain Bolt method of configuring Kerberos this morning for end-to-end authentication. A very lightning tour. We're not really going to touch on that this afternoon because you do have another option in 2013 for getting per user identity to your data to allow personalization and targeting of information from your data store to your UI. We'll take a little bit of a look around architecting of a BI solution, more from the point of view of trying to provide your customers with an approach to implementing an ongoing BI solution from bare bones, I do Excel on my own in the corner over there, but my spreadsheets are really good type of BI, all the way through to a full enterprise utilizing SharePoint, SQL Server and Office to its full extent. So a kind of little roadmap we're going to be going through there, more so than any kind of physical or logical architecting of a SharePoint farm. Had some questions after the last session about architecting on a physical and logical basis for BI. Again, happy to take those kind of questions offline, because if we started discussing those within the session itself, we'd be here till midnight. And then we're going to get more demos from Dave on some of the really good features which we have coming up in the latest version of SharePoint and Office. So business intelligence in 2013 has actually really moved on in a lot of areas. We mentioned this morning we've got kind of 3 sort of cornerstones of the 2010 product, and that is reporting services for managed BI, performance point services for data exploration, which is slightly more constructed but allows a user more freedom to explore the data and analyze the data, and then the self-service BI model, which is being promoted through the use of Excel client and Excel services. And again, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to have a look at a few things here. Once again, we are not going to look at the BI burger. So we'll get rid of that thing, and we'll talk about BI in terms of the 2 main protagonists, SQL Server and SharePoint. Office kind of gets bundled in a little bit with SharePoint here, but SQL Server is really the main core of Microsoft BI platform. We already spoke about this morning. I'm not going to repeat myself too much, but basically we have integration services, database services, analysis services, and reporting services within the SQL Server product. And an integration services we covered this morning is really our data gatherer. It takes data from all different sources, puts them together. We can do validation, we can do data cleansing. We can bring in other things from SQL Server 2012, sort of master data records, things like that. And we can actually create a data warehouse in SQL Server to store our information. And that is why we store our data in our SQL Server database. We don't really get information out of that, we just get our data. If we're looking to surface information and actually get some meaning out of all these millions of rows of data that we're storing, then we need to think about doing some aggregation, and we do that, as before, with analysis services. Analysis services, multi-dimensional cubes. These are the traditional cubes. But we also have another option with 2012, and to make full use of this with the SharePoint 2013 platform, and that's this idea of tabular analysis services, which is effectively the Power Pivot engine, the in-memory Power Pivot engine, which we had with 2010, and is now available to us effectively out of SharePoint, out of Excel, as standalone, but to be used in Excel in analysis services. And it provides a more, what we would term a BI semantic layer, which basically means a sort of almost ethereal layer sitting between your data, your real data, and the client. It's a much more simplified layer which allows multiple client tools to effectively talk to the same data model in a way that makes more sense to end users rather than some of maybe more esoteric stuff of pure analysis services. Reporting services, again, we covered this morning, and with 2012 SQL Server, we covered a little bit of that this morning, and allows us to do reporting either standalone here in native reporting services, or as part of SharePoint by integrating it with the SharePoint farm through instantiating reporting services as a service application. We covered that this morning. I don't really plan to go over that again. Also, we will not be covering again Visio services. We'll be concentrating on really two main areas this afternoon as far as looking at tools, and that's looking at reporting services, Power View. So Power View is an enhancement, a change, an improvement, an addition, whichever way you want to phrase it, of reporting services, and comes with SQL Server 2012. We'll also be looking at a little bit more detail at Excel services and Power Pivot, how Power Pivot exists and how it relates to SQL Server analysis tabular, and how we can use that to make powerful enterprise solutions, and also help us migrate from this sort of siloed Excel model to a more enterprise shared model. So let's start diving into couple of these new components. We're only going to look at two main ones here, really. We're going to look first of all at reporting services, Power View and Power Pivot. But I thought I would just, for the moment, share with you a little bit of information about the demonstration platform that we're going to be using this afternoon, because it's a little bit different from what we had this morning. This morning's demonstration platform was basically a VM running in a hosted environment. We had SharePoint on one server, SQL Server and analysis services on another server, sitting in a standard sort of shared, it's fast hosts, I believe we were hosting that with. Here it's slightly different. We've actually got a hybrid farm set up here. So this is a really sort of powerful message which you can hand to your customers, that you don't have to have your data in the cloud if you want to actually have your SharePoint in the cloud. So what we've got here is we have SharePoint installed on 3 Azure servers, Windows Azure servers. We've got a SharePoint server, an Office Web App server, and a SQL database server. But all of our data, which you'll see today, is actually coming from tabular, generally from tabular analysis services, which is actually on our premises at Rigian, just outside the NIA, on the footsteps of the NIA in Birmingham. So that's coming all the way from there, and it's been connected to our SharePoint farm, which sits in Azure. So our data is hosted on our little mini data. I hate to call it a data center, it's one rack. Okay, it's one rack of servers. Okay, but it's sitting in our offices, Okay, whereas the actual SharePoint is sitting in Microsoft's Azure cloud. So, and the way we do that is you can actually invoke a thing called the extended Azure Virtual Networks. So we've got our AD, and we've extended a virtual network in Azure to talk to our AD, and effectively we can set up the single sign-on. So when we log on to here, we are actually logging on to our normal working domain here from our machine, and it's actually talking quite happily with full Kerberos pass-through all the way through to our premises. So we're going up to the cloud, we're logging on up to the cloud, we're using our own AD credentials from our internal network. It's going up to the cloud, and then that's being routed through Azure onto on-premise, onto our premises, and talking to our data with full Kerberos end-to-end configuration. So that's quite a nice setup for us to demonstrate to our customers and to you guys that this is possible. You don't, and there's no ADFS involved in this. Okay, haven't had to do any ADFS configuration. This is really easy and simple to configure, and I can give you a reference at the end how to do this. So we're going to talk now a little bit about Power View, and also we're going to talk a little bit about Power Pivot. So Power View is really a new self-service BI tool for users over and above Excel. So Power View is installed by IT services, and more importantly, it can be designed. Power View dashboards or reports, however you want to phrase it, are designed by business owners, built by business owners, and deployed by business owners. So it very much is an end user tool. And as Dave likes to say, all your visualizations should be just 2 clicks away. Used to be 3 clicks, it's gone down to 2 clicks now. So the essential facts about Power View are it's a Microsoft Silverlight. The tool basically runs in Microsoft Silverlight. It connects to tabular and Power Pivot data sources, i.e. this BI semantic model we've talked about. And there will be an update coming out shortly which will allow you to connect it to classic multi-dimensional analysis services cubes as well. But for the moment, it's just tabular or Power Pivot data sources. It's available in 2 flavors. You've got a standalone flavor of Power View, which exists really only in SharePoint, and you've got an Excel embedded Power View, both of which you'll see in the demo. And one nice little feature you've got, you can publish these reports and things to PowerPoint, so you can actually run demonstrations off of PowerPoint of your Power View charts. So I think without further ado, I'll hand over to Dave, and we're going to talk a little bit about the data source behind Power View first, i.e. Power Pivot, and a little bit about that and going to tabular analysis services, and obviously do a little bit of demonstration of Power View itself. So over to Dave.
Okay. So the demonstration data source, the actual business content is data for a commercial organisation selling retail clothing in stores across Europe. So this is Excel 2013. Power Pivot has been available since Excel 2010, but in Excel 2010 it was a free add-in that you could download. In 2013 it's actually baked into the product. And the kind of rationale behind it was to help combat this kind of Excel hell scenario that people might be familiar with, where business users within the organisation do large amounts of crunching of the data in Excel through bringing the data into an initial landing worksheet, crunching it into pivot tables, dashboards, etc. It's kind of a familiar scenario where the internal IT department can't necessarily deliver the BI quickly enough, so you get these tactical solutions. You know, we see them all the time coming up through departments. So what Power Pivot allows you to do is to separate the actual business logic of the business data model and build effectively a cube within Excel. Separate that from the actual presentation logic in the worksheets. So, you know, if some business rules change or you add additional calculations in the data model, they immediately ripple through into any of the data visualizations that you've got. Our data source that Dave's been describing, which is now in tabular, started life in this Excel through Power Pivot. So Power Pivot is a new tab in the ribbon there. So I can click on that Power Pivot ribbon tab. And if I click Manage, that then takes me into the data model. So you've got a separate window within Excel where you're modeling the data. And it's reasonably simple to set up a basic Power Pivot model. You just import data using the wizards that are available from various sources and then relate them together on the common columns between the sources. So I'm not going to build a model now. I'm going to show you that more looking at the end results and browsing it using Power View. But before I come away from that, I just want to draw attention to the type of performance that you can get. So I mentioned this is a retail clothing company. So my main data set that contains all my sales, if I just have a closer look at that, you can see there I've got 44 million rows of data there loaded into Excel. And that's pretty trivial for Power Pivot. You know, it's a 400 meg file, fair enough, and a memory footprint of about 1 gig when you're browsing it and using it. But the response times when you're creating dashboards with that or using Power View are very good. So I can show you browsing that data with Power View, either in Excel or natively in SharePoint. As it's a SharePoint conference, I thought I'd go for the native mode. So this is the scenario Dave was describing. This is SharePoint running on Windows Azure. But as I'm browsing the data and you're seeing the visualizations, that's coming from on-premise. So I have here a data connection to my tabular model. I can click on the ellipsis on that connection there. And then that then opens up various options. One of those is to create a Power View report. So I click on Create Power View Report. And that then opens up in the browser the designer. So unlike the tools we showed this morning, we're actually creating the report in the browser. Okay, so I'm going to look at my sales for my store sales. So that was that 44 million row data set. So I bring in my sales values, drag them across onto the canvas there, and that's going to then display the sales value there. And I'm going to analyze that by my countries that I trade in. So I bring country across, and I can just drop that side by side. All right, that looks pretty small. That won't be a problem as I expand it. And I'm going to visualize that as a bar chart. Okay, so I can sort that ascending, descending. I sort it by sales value. But what's new for 2013, the 2013 version of Power View that's I think is quite exciting is this map visualization here. So I can click on Map, and that's then going to integrate with Bing Maps and render that data for each country and locate it on the map. So that you can see from the field list over here that the size of the circle there is representing the relative amount of sales in that country. So £28 million worth of sales in France, and just a smaller one in Switzerland, 181,000. Power View now recognises as well the hierarchies within your data model. So I can take my cities from my organisation data set there, drop those underneath the country. I can take the store addresses, drop those underneath the city. I'll just expand that a little bit. And that then allows me to start drilling down. So for example, I can double click on Portugal, and then that'll open out and show me the sales per city within Portugal. Similarly, I can drill back up again, double click on France. Internet connection is a little bit slow, but it's not too bad. Should be okay. Usually it's pretty instant. I can always drop back into Excel and do it. If
Can you all get off your mobile phone?
Here we go.
There we go.
Yeah, so that goes in and then shows the sales per city in France there. And I can continue to go down into Paris. And then that'll expand out, and I can see all my individual stores by street address within Paris there. This particular client were especially interested in the extent to which sales were being made at a markdown or sales were being made at full price, obviously wanting to maximize full price sales. So we had an attribute within our data model to allow us to do that, which is called selling price. So I can drag across selling price there and drop it within the canvas. And what that'll actually do then is turn each of those data points into a bar chart based on the selling price. So in that central Paris store there, I can hover over that and see that, with full price sales 196,000, hover over the red quadrant there and see that those are markdown sales. So immediately looking at this, I can see my Western Paris store is not making a higher proportion of sales at full price. So maybe it's to do with where it's located, or they might have stock control issues. So very nice visualization there. I can come back in and see that proportional visualization at country level and at the top level. What I want to do now is to show how you can make these visualizations work together. If I just go back into France there, what I can do now is to bring in another visualization. So I will bring in my list of departments that operate across my stores. So I can bring across department there. This might be easier if I go into my layout and move the legend down to the bottom. Okay, just move this across a little. It's quite flexible in the way you can position these data sets. So I'm going to display my departments using, I'll use my sales values and my margins. And I'll view those as a clustered bar. And what I can do now is I can start clicking on those, and as I click on those, it'll automatically filter across into the map. So for example, if I click on Essentials, there you can see it updates, and there's no orange sections because we don't do promotions on Essentials. So really, it is really quick to do those visualizations. Once you understand the data model, you have access to the data model, you can just drag and drop and create those visualizations. And there are far more other ways to visualize the data that I could go into as well, but that's just a quick example of it. Just coming back into Excel, into that Power, so this is the Power Pivot version, the same data set, but running locally in Excel. I should have in here a worksheet here where I've just basically created a very similar thing but in Excel. So this all runs locally in Excel, and the performance is good in Excel as well, even against 44 million records. So I've actually got some trend charts at the bottom there, and as I'm clicking on those, the map's updating and the trend is updating as well. I can also click on France and see the trend individually for France updating here for the 3 sections. So it's a really nice visually engaging tool to browse the data, whether it's through Excel or through SharePoint. The Excel version needs to run either against Power Pivot, or it can just run against ordinary data that you have available in your worksheet. It can't connect to an external data source, whereas the SharePoint version connects to an external data source, either a Power Pivot workbook in SharePoint or a analysis services tabular model running in SQL Server. Okay, so that's Power View.
Okay.
Are there any performance issues with doing stuff on the source in 365?
The main issue with, with 365, no, it works fine with 365, but the main issue is with Power Pivot especially, you can only upload a certain size of Power Pivot file into 365. But the thing about 365 is that I can't keep up with all the changes that are coming through, and sometimes I'm worried that I might answer a question and the answer might not stay right for long. So I think the 365 situation is fluid.
This was recommended as an approach for access services.
Right.
This morning, so
Okay.
Okay. Okay, so we'll move on now at reasonable speed and make sure we get through stuff. And now we're going to take another look back at Excel services. We mentioned this morning that Excel services is really the self-service BI flagship as far as Microsoft is concerned, and it's even more so now really with 2013 moving on. And I think Microsoft is certainly putting a lot of energy into Excel and into Power View as well, and maybe at the expense of other tools, one of which we mentioned this morning was Performance Point, and we maybe have a discussion about that at the end if we have some time. But self-service BI, let's call it BI++, as far as Microsoft's concerned, Excel services is their flagship product. And again, as this morning, nothing's really changed on this front. It is installed by IT services, but very much it's a user-driven or business owner-driven tool to be able to be designed, built, and deployed by the business user. Just again, a bit of a refresh on our friend Power Pivot. So Power Pivot exists within Excel as an add-in. In 2013, it's a native add-in to Excel, so it's there already. It's not really an add-in, sorry, it's actually natively part of Excel. When you deploy an Excel spreadsheet with Power Pivot data in it, then when you deploy that to SharePoint, then SharePoint, it needs to have some method of running that Power Pivot data, and that's done by having a server-side version installed, which is the Power Pivot service application, which exists on one or other of your SharePoint servers. So I'm going to not say too much more about that because I know Dave's got some great demonstrations here of Excel and some of the new features in 2013 Excel on how you can actually slice and dice your data far more easily and do some more analysis than you could in 2010. Dave, over to you.
Okay.
Are you ready?
Yes. Just having a bit of a... okay. Okay, coming back into Power Pivot here, I'm just going to show you some example. I'm going to show you two new features that are available within pivot table functionality within Excel. The two things I'm going to show you are Quick Explore and the timeline. And then I'm going to show also how much richer the functionality for pivot tables is now within the browser within SharePoint. Okay, so coming back to my Power Pivot data model here, the obvious way to interact with that data is through a pivot table. So I click on new pivot table from the data model there, and then that opens me my usual pivot table interface. I can then start to analyze that data. So I'm going to look at sales in order to show this Quick Explore feature, and I'm going to analyze that by my months and by my products. Okay, so you could do all this in 2010. You can drill down because it recognises the hierarchies within the data, and even with 44 million rows of data, it still reacts very quickly. What's new? A new feature for 2013 is this icon that keeps popping up, this Quick Explore icon. So, for example, if I look at ladies' footwear, we do ladies' footwear in seasonal collections. We have a spring and summer collection, an autumn and winter collection. So I might be interested in analysing by those connections. So I can click on Quick Explore, and that then opens me a connection into my data model. And then I could pick my seasons, click on those, and then it'll open up that ladies' footwear section. What it's actually done is it's just taken the products off the rows in the pivot table list, moved it up to the filters, and then replaced on rows with the season. So you could actually have done that in 2010 by dragging around in the field list, but by making it happen immediately in the table itself, it's moving Excel much more to being a proper client for data analysis. Similarly, I could go into the 2011 year there, click on Quick Explore, and I could analyse that by the countries that I trade in. and then you get that immediate view of the data there. So that's called Quick Explore. So I'm just going to show one more new feature now, which is the timeline. So I'm going to create another pivot table. And this time, I'm going to do sales again. And I'm going to view that by years and months. So I go into my calendar area and I bring in my calendar year and my calendar month. So that breaks my data out by year and month. Within the data modeling tools in Power Pivot, it's especially easy to do things like create time-based calculations. So a classic one in retail that we came across in this project would be, you're not so much interested in comparing sales this month to last month, you're interested in the same month last year, the parallel period as we call it, because it's a very seasonal business. So I have a calculation here where I can easily do that by bringing in sales for last year. And I can see those side by side. I can easily produce there a trend chart to reflect that. So I'll create a trend line there. And let's just knock this down a bit in size so that I've got a bit more space. Okay, so I can see my trend chart there. Right, so what I wanted to do with this was to show the timeline. So that's showing over a very long period of time, 3 years. And obviously we haven't got, the red line represents last year, the blue line represents this year, and I can see there's a fairly close correlation. We haven't got any data for 2009, so we haven't got any prior year sales for 2010. So I really want to refine the period that I'm looking at to analyse, because that's a very long period. So if I go into my Insert tab there, I can see I've got a new facility here called Timeline. So I can click on that and pick the date field from my data model. And then that opens up this new control here, which is the timeline control. So what I can do with that is, let's say I want to look at the financial year. I can drag and drop from April across, and the graph will immediately update there to show the financial year. If I just pull it a little bit further into March. There we go. And again, you can mix that with the slicers. So I can go insert and do the slicer, which has been going since 2010, Excel 210. So I can analyse by my departments and my seasons. So I can quickly see, so for example, if I look at autumn and winter sales,
Connect to that.
yeah, I think I've just messed up that and not connected it to. So if I change, if I go into report connections and make sure I've got it connected to this sheet, which is sheet 2. If I'd have clicked in the pivot table when I did that, it would have worked. Okay, that's better. So, so I can click on autumn and winter, spring, summer, and see the trend update, and you can see that it's how the seasonal effect of the data. Or I can view footwear, kids and baby, etc. Within the timeline, I can also pick to view by quarters. So I can pick a range of quarters there instead, or I can come up to years. So that's the timeline feature. Just before I finish, I just want to drop back into SharePoint and view an online version of that report. So this is, again, running in, that one was running on Power Pivot. This one's running in SharePoint and connecting to the tabular data model.
On-premise.
Yeah, the on-premise tabular data model, that's right, yeah. So you can see I've got the timeline there, and in the browser the timeline works. I can drag and drop, and it will very quickly show me that trend line for that period. So pretty impressive performance considering the data's nowhere near the visualization. I can also use the Quick Explore feature within Excel. So for example, if I click on September within the browser, I can click on Quick Explore within the browser, and I could view by, for example, season, and break that data out that way. You also, in 2013, have full access to the field list within the pivot table in the browser, which is new for 2013. So for example, if I wanted to break it down by autumn and winter, and then by country, I could just drag and drop that onto the axis there, and then it will break that out within the pivot table. So potentially, you could have a lot of your users not on the latest version of Excel. They haven't got Excel 2013. Maybe you've got just the power users that create this material, publishing it into SharePoint, and then that then leaves the rest of the user community to consume it in the browser. And they could still have a lot of dynamic features to change the view of the data, to analyze the data within the browser.
So does it only work in Internet Explorer?
Not as far as I know.
Sorry, what was the
Browser
question?
dependency.
To be honest, I haven't tried that. To be honest, we have to try that. So, I believe it works okay. It's not Silverlight dependent or anything like that. So
Yeah, there's no Silverlight in this, no.
okay.
Okay.
Okay. So let's move on, and let's take a look at securing the BI platform again. We did this morning, and we had a fairly, rapid look through the Kerberos configuration for a BI farm, and it was a very rapid walkthrough. And with 2013, the situation hasn't really changed that much. Okay, if you want to personalize, target information, restrict your users' view of the data in a cube or in a SQL Server database to that which they can see via their AD permissions, then again, end-to-end Kerberos configuration is still something that is required. And however, there is another option available to us in 2013, sort of. Okay, so for those of you who are involved in configuring Kerberos end-to-end authentication across SharePoint farms, when I first saw it, I thought, oh goody, this is a second opportunity, this is a different chance to actually not have to do Kerberos configuration, but unfortunately, I'm afraid it's not quite as advertised, perhaps. So here we have our farm, which we had this morning, and just as before, we've got our web server, our SharePoint server. Both can be the same server. We have our claims-based authentication going between our web application and maybe our Excel services application. Here we've got reporting services. It's the same thing. And we have our analysis services cube. And remember that analysis services and SQL Server only understand Windows authentication. So we have to invoke our claims to Windows token service in order to get Windows tokens from SQL Server and analysis servers and pass those tokens to reporting services, performance point services, Excel services, doesn't really matter, and so that they can connect successfully to the final data source. Our Kerberos configuration is layered on top of that, and as we said, can be messy. Is actually the simplest solution in terms of maintenance and ongoing support, because Kerberos is a natural product of the Windows platform. So, although it can be somewhat troublesome to get working. However, there is another option which we've got available to us in 2013, specifically with use of reporting services, Excel services, and performance point services, and that's this EffectiveUserName. EffectiveUserName is touted as per user authentication without the need to configure Kerberos. That, I'm afraid, is not quite what the fine print says. So it is very simple. EffectiveUserName is actually just a property of the connection string which goes into analysis services. And that's really all it is. You do get additional UI support within Excel services, performance point services, and reporting services in order to configure this. But actually under the hood, it's just changing the connection string to include this dynamic username, effectively, is what it does under the hood. Now, So this is really what it is. It's just a change to the connection string into analysis services, and it's a dynamic change. So it gives you per user identity without having to worry about Kerberos, almost. Okay, so you don't have to worry about doing any delegation like we talked this morning and set SPN for Excel services and things like that. But it doesn't work with Power Pivot data sources. So when Power Pivot is trying to connect to external data sources, this does not work. You still need to have Kerberos configured for that. One big thing is every account, if it's running Excel services, performance point services, or reporting services, that account must be an admin on the analysis services cubes. So that may be a stopper as far as some organizations are concerned. Okay, so that is a big gotcha. It must be an admin, basically to allow credentials to be passed. All connections which go into analysis services cube which use that will obviously be affected. And you must configure Kerberos for the analysis server itself. So you don't kind of get away with it, you sort of get away with it, you get away with some of it, but you still have to be able to know how to configure Kerberos for the analysis services server itself. So it's not really getting out of that. But it is another alternative and is there under certain circumstances if you decide to use it. But it is actually a feature of analysis services rather than anything else. So let's take a look now at architecting a 2013 SharePoint solution. And this is really more, not so much an architecture, I suppose, more of a roadmap of what you might like to consider and how to approach an ongoing project with a customer who maybe comes to you and says, we've got lots of stuff in Excel, a bit of SQL Server maybe, some other stuff here and there, but we haven't really got a unified picture of our data, and we want to be able to get a real one source of the truth, so to speak. And it's very much a journey, really, as far as we're concerned. You don't just suddenly switch the switch and say you've now got instant enterprise BI just simply by installing SharePoint and installing Excel services. It doesn't kind of work that way. This is not an instant fix. And in some cases, this can take years to achieve. Because ultimately, the data is the key to the whole thing. And if the data is no good, then you may as well not bother. And one of the first things we have to do is get the data sorted out and get it working in the way we want it. So we talk about stages 1 to 5. And this is only Ridgeon's sort of out of the way. We sort of kind of figure this thing out after we've had sort of 14 years of working with management information and business intelligence on and off different platforms, different products along the way. Generally always in the Microsoft space, but different products along the way. So stage 1, we would consider to be like tactical, and there's no SQL Server maybe on premise. The users don't know about SQL Server, they might not have licenses, they might not even, they might have it, but they might not know they've got it. And so really, the business intelligence is done as Excel, as independent Excel users. And they are there just using Excel. Now with 2013, we have an option now with Power Pivot, as Dave showed. You can actually use Power Pivot as almost like a data warehousing tool, but locally on the clients, locally for the clients. And so you can bring in external data from other SQL Server databases, from flat files, from other Excel spreadsheets, in order to produce, so the data analysis workers working with Excel have this capability to produce their own little mini data warehouses. And you think, well, that's it's still kind of working in isolation. So we might like to think that we can actually then step it up a little bit and think about actually introducing the idea of SQL Server, but no SharePoint at this stage, because then users can still carry on working with Excel. They can still use the client tool of their choice, what they know and love. But then we can think about introducing a more common data structure underneath. This one isn't using, the semantic model is just using a straightforward data warehouse and taking data out of the data warehouse into Excel. So the data exists in the data warehouse, the Excel clients just work off of that. And that's fine if you're in the internal network, but if you're trying to share that data out to a wider audience, then we've got problems. And this is where we can introduce the idea of SharePoint. SharePoint then brings about the ability to publish this information out beyond the internal network. We can make this available via browser to different departments, different sites, maybe even to home workers. One thing we're using here, which we haven't spoken about, is we have direct access now on our internal network. So we don't even have to log on to a VPN or anything now. This would work over a VPN, but with direct access with Windows 2012, it's just instant connectivity to the corporate network. So we now have the ability to publish this out, to share our spreadsheets out, to share our Excel spreadsheets out, and other tools as well, Power Pivot and things like that. Sorry, Performance Point as well. Here then is when we start to get a central data model, and this is where we start really fine-tuning our data. This is where we introduce this idea of a semantic BI model. This is where we introduce the idea of an intermediate layer which then surfaces data in a very much more user-acceptable way, where you saw Dave was working off of Power View and then Excel, and he can do the same with other tools as well. But it's a common layer. Every tool they go into, they see the same data structures appearing, and so it's a much more common, everyone's working literally off the same version of the truth. And the beauty of working with Power Pivot, if you can get your users to start experimenting with Power Pivot and working with Power Pivot, is those Power Pivot models can be transported and put into tabular analysis services, such as, like, for example, the examples Dave's been showing you started out as Power Pivot data sources within an Excel spreadsheet, and he simply moved them to our on-premise tabular data source. So we've got centralized data still stored on our premise, which started out live as an Excel spreadsheet, is now centralized, and everyone can actually get access to that and share that information. And then finally, if we're talking about the expanded tool set with an enterprise, fully enterprise solution, we have that BI semantic model layer still in place. We have SharePoint, and we can maybe introduce other tools. IDV mapping is a great mapping solution. Panorama Necto provides some great visualizations on analysis services cubes. And performance point services and other reporting services can be brought in to bring the picture. So it's not a one-stop shop of, we've got Excel, we're suddenly into the enterprise. We like to bring our users along a path, and we like to think of this sort of maturity. The more business analyst independence sort of kind of dies away. If you've got one guy in the corner and he's the oracle, the font of all knowledge on business, it's a weak point. It's a point of failure, single point of failure. If you've got one guy or a couple of guys who know all about the business intelligence, okay, so that tends to be a weak point and dies away as you get this more expanded enterprise view. More reliance on IT and BI professionals happens as you move along the stages, because you're more dependent upon people with SQL Server knowledge and BI knowledge. Maybe that's an expansion that the business is planning, or maybe it's a risk that they may not want to engage on. Functionality increases as you move on, scalability increases as you move down the stages, and also governance and security. Bringing in SharePoint can help govern and secure the information. Kerberos authentication helps secure the information. So there's a whole bunch of dependencies, there's a whole bunch of paths to go down. So, wrapping up here really with a final demonstration, and I'm going to bring in Dave again in a second. So this is a demonstration of the 2013 BI toolset, bringing several facets of it together. And then once we finish this, then happy to take any questions which you might have on what we've said, hopefully if people are here from this morning as well, on any of the two sessions which we've spent today. So Dave, over to you.
Okay, just want to show you two more things before we finish. The first is a different way of connecting to the data in the tabular model or Power Pivot, which is cube functions. And the second one is using apps for Office within 2013. So I've been doing a few things with pivot tables, and there are certain limitations to how you structure the data within pivot tables. So for example, in this pivot table here, if I wanted to insert a column within that, I'm going to get an error because you can't change the structure of the pivot table. There is an alternative approach to connect to this data that's been around. I think it's actually been around since Excel 2007, but it can end up with very, very powerful visualizations, which I'm hoping I'm going to be able to show you. So what I can do within this pivot table is I can go into the Analyze tab within the pivot table tools here, click on OLAP Tools, and this hidden away here is Convert to Formulas. So if I click on that, click the Convert button, then this visualization is no longer a pivot table. What it does is go through each cell within the Excel sheet and convert it into a function that calls into the analysis services model or the Power Pivot model to pull back the data for that cell. And once you've done that, you can lay things out however you want to lay them out. You can insert columns, you can control that. So what's involved in these cube functions? If I just switch to this one here, I've got a stripped down example here. So you have a cube value function that has the reference to the data connection, but then what's key is you can use these cell references that Excel users are very used to working with to reference how that data is sliced. So if I click on that formula bar there, you can see that it's referencing these particular cells to pull back that data. So how is it using those cells? Because they just look like they've got text in them. Well, those are actually cube function cells as well that are pulling back elements from the data model, from the dimensions, the hierarchies in the data model. So if you set that up properly, you can then do things like filling across and having the data pull out from the cube and gradually build up this visualization. So for example, pulling out the products list in the correct order that's laid down within the system. And once you've done that, you can fill on the values as well. So I can pull those across and it will pull those out from the data set. Just showing me those hashes there because I haven't made the columns wide enough. There we go. So what you can start doing then is you can start building up your report using some of the nice new functionality in Excel 2013. You see this quick analysis icon here. What that does is give users a more immediate access to the graphing and visualization capabilities. So if I click on that, it makes suggestions about how I might want to visualize that data. A great one is spark lines. So I can click on spark line and that produces me a little inline trend for that data. You can then work on the design of those spark lines. A nice thing to do is to put markers, say the high point in green and the low point in red, for example. Obviously, you can do other charts as well. So, for example, if I click on Quick Analysis there, I go into the charts, and as I hover over these chart suggestions, it shows me what the chart will look like with my data. So that's actually what it will look like. So if I click on Stack Column, for example, that's going to produce that chart. Formatting the charts is easier as well. It's more immediate. It's right next to the chart there. So let's say I want to get rid of the title. You can also team this with the other analysis tools. So for example, my favorite one, the slicers. If I open that data model there, that should then present me with a list of the items I could use for slicers. I'll just use the season one. Okay, so as I click that, nothing happens, but that's because we're in a slightly more detailed mode here where I have to configure things, but it's very easy. If I just add to that formula a comma and start typing slicer, the name of the slicer will pop up, so I can reference that within my formula. So then, as I then click on spring, summer, autumn, winter, if I just hit return on that. Sorry, yeah, as I click spring, summer, it will then update that one, just that one cell. So obviously I need to fill across and fill down, and then it will just work. So you can see how you could build up free format reports in Excel very quickly. Notice on the graph there, can you see the animations of the graph? That's new for 2013. Seems like a little bit of a frilly bells and whistles thing, but apparently it draws your eye to the changes in the data more, the animations, so it's actually kind of a hard business reason for having it there. So moving on from that, this is the kind of thing we've produced using that technique. I've got a dashboard here, so this is running within SharePoint now, built up using those cube functions. So it's displaying in the browser, running under Windows Azure, but connecting back to data on-premise again. I think it's coming. As the internet slowed down. On after this, I'm going to show you, as soon as I just two seconds on this, and then I'll show you a quick demo of apps for Office. So you're probably aware that, oh, here it comes, I'll just talk about this now. So so this is an example of a dashboard that's been built up and then is being rendered in the browser using those cube functions. So obviously you can use the slicers as I've shown before. One other thing that we did with this, which is in the data modeling, we're actually connecting to the Azure data market to pull some external data in to mash up with our internal sales data. So one thing that this client was interested in was weather data, and you can get the Met Office data free online. It's available in the Azure data market. You can import that in on a regular basis, and then they were interested in looking at the effect of weather on footfall, and if we have a bad week, is it because of something external we couldn't control, i.e. the weather? So here we're displaying performance for a particular week, and we've had a patchy week, although year to date is good, and we can then view that for a different week and see the weather data update. So, for example, if I click on here, and you get your filters available within the browser, so you can change the selected week, etc. So I redisplay that, and so it's coming up warmer, drier this week, better performance, because the average temperature is higher than it was the same week last year, and the rainfall is lower. So, you can bring lots of different data sources in, and you've got some great visualization tools on the front end there. Let's just quickly do the Apps for Office demo. 5 minutes. Okay, so you're aware, of course, now there's an app store for Office, and what I've been sort of taking a keen interest on what sort of apps are coming along for BI, and I've just got a quick example of a visual one that you can use here, just to show how you could mix the data, mix those things together. So within Excel now, you have a new button on the Insert tab, which is Apps for Office. So you could click on that. You could go into the App Store and select apps. I'll just quickly select one that I've used before, this Bubbles app. So that easily embeds the app within my spreadsheet there. So there's quite a clue there as to how to use it. So I click on that and then select my data here. And what this data is actually showing is for my stores in Paris, it's showing sales value and stock cover. So stock cover is something they're really interested in analysing. It's just the number of times the current value of stock could cover the weekly sales. So for example, we've got £1,000 worth of stock, we sell £100 a week, that's a stock cover ratio of 10. So if I click OK, it's going to then visualise that data according to the data that I selected. So the size of the circle is the relative size of the sales value, and the deepness of the red is the stock cover. So when I look at this wrap store here, you can see that store has got a particularly high, compared to everyone else, stock cover. So maybe they've got too much cash tied up in their stock. They're carrying too much stock compared to everyone else. So it's a pretty trivial example, but the App Store's in its infancy, and these sort of things are going to grow, and you're going to be able to use these tools for very small amounts, or for free even, to enhance the data visualization. So, I mean, that's another good reason to go for Excel 2013. There could be security concerns, I guess. Not every organization is going to want various apps being downloaded and added, but you can have an approved list of apps. You can also have a private app store within SharePoint just for your organization. Okay, thanks.
Okay, so just summarising. I thought I hit too many buttons there. Oops, I did hit too many buttons. Okay, so just summarising, we've throughout the whole 2 sessions, we've looked at the BI suite from an overall point of view. We've looked at the various components. We've looked at securing the platforms, both in the 2010 and the 2013. And we've had a little look at a roadmap which might be of use to people on how to actually take customers through their BI experience into the future. And we've had a plethora of demos from Dave here. So I'll just leave this with thanks very much for coming to the sessions. Hope they've been of interest to you. We've covered a fair amount of material in them. I know some questions probably people have. Very happy to take them offline. And again, please contact us if you've got any further questions about what we've said. And hope you enjoy the last session of the conference, which is coming up very shortly. Thank you very much.